The Hela cell line, made for medical research, and the origin of these cells, Henrietta Lacks. The human cells are used worldwide for medical research. Cells are usually taken from a willing patient with signed consent. The ownership of the cell line and the profits from its sales are debated in the medical community to this day. Henrietta Lacks did give assigned permission to her doctor to collect her cells for diagnosis, but not for research. Henrietta Lacks lived in a poor community in Clover, Virginia, according to The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Scoot, 2010, Crown Publishing, New York. In 1951, she visited Johns Hopkins Hospital in Maryland, describing a constant painful knot in her womb. Her doctor was George Guy, MD. He saw Henrietta and took a sample of her internal growth cells. The biopsy of the cancer cells were cultured and grown in Dr. Guy's laboratory. They grew at an exponential rate, faster than most malignant cancers. The cells lived longer in a culture than any other cell had prior to Henrietta Lacks. The Hela cells were special because they could live for years outside the body, whereas most cells only lived for a month or two. They were used for medical testing at Johns Hopkins Hospital and sold to other labs in the US and eventually worldwide. The Hela cells were contaminated. The Hela cells often contaminated and took over other cell lines. So in the lab, they put the Hela cells in one area and they would contaminate cells in a petri dish or a test tube in another area. Henrietta's cancer infiltrated her whole body. It was discovered on her autopsy that it was absolutely everywhere, in her abdomen and thorax area. There was likely no treatment at the time that would have saved her. She was treated with irradiated cotton one time internally, right up next to her cervical cancer cells, but the treatment likely killed her faster because it was just too much radiation all at one time. She died 1 week after her first visit to Dr. Guy. Unfortunately, the medical treatment for Black people at Johns Hopkins in 1950s was questionable due to so much racial controversy. And Johns Hopkins, at that time and today, is a top 10 hospital in the United States. In the 1950s, it was a charity hospital in East Baltimore, Maryland. They had public wards that were mostly for Black patients. Segregation was still a thing in the 1950s, so there were no Black people on the white wards, and they had separate doctors and staff. Rumors that there were lots of rumors that Black people were taken off the street for medical experimentation at the time. I have no idea if that's true or not. But as a result, Black people were very untrusting of medical practitioners. Black children were often not allowed off the porch, still a thing to this day, by parents to protect them from the hospital seeking unwitting test subjects. The Hela cell ownership is debated still because of the monetary gains in worldwide sales to research laboratories. Dr. Guy sold the Hela cells he collected from Henrietta. When he collected them, he labeled them H-E-L-A, H-E for Henrietta and L-A for Lacks. In the 1950s labs, all specimens were labeled just with a name, and I would presume a date. Now specimens tend to have a number as well associated with samples to remove that personal ownership of the tissue once it's outside the body. There are debates still in scientific circles on the bioethics of tissue ownership. The Lacks family, Henrietta's children, wanted to sue for financial compensation. There have been many other court battles. Some of them won over cell line ownership. In June 4th, 1997, there was a tribute to Henrietta by the Maryland State Congress thanking her for her contribution to science. When Henrietta's medical records were made public, the family got very upset, and it is nowadays a HIPAA violation. The Health Information Privacy Accountability Act forbids medical personnel from releasing patient information to anyone other than the patient. Hela cells continue to be used for medical research. Hela cells are responsible for many discoveries, one example being HPV-18, which is a human papillomavirus 18. It's a cancer-causing virus. It was the cause of Henrietta's cancer and ultimately her death. It was discovered in 1984 by Hausen and published in an article called A New Type of Papilloma DNA, Its Presence in Genital Cancer Biopsies and in Cell Lines Derived from Cervical Cancer, in the magazine European Molecular Biology Organization, issue 3, volume 5, if you want to look it up. To date, the Hela cells remain one of the most widely used cell lines in scientific research. Hela cells from Henrietta Lacks contributed greatly to scientific study, and the debate of who owns those cells continues today.